Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all in another online talk in the Punjabi Diaspora lecture series. The series is being organized by the Center for Diaspora Studies, Punjabi University, Patiala. Today, we have with us Professor Gurminder Kaur Bhogal from Wellesley College, USA. The topic of our lecture today is the Harmonium from Christian missionary hymns to Sikh Kirtan. I welcome Professor Gurminder Bhogal and Professor Gurmukh Singh, Director, Center for Diaspora Studies, Punjabi University, and all our viewers. Now, I would like to invite Professor Gurmukh to formally welcome and introduce our guest for today.
ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ ਧਰਮ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਸਤਿਕਾਰਯੋਗ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਗੁਰਮਿੰਦਰ ਕੌਰ ਭੋਗਲ ਜੀ, ਪਿਆਰੇ ਧਰਮਜੀਤ। ਅੱਜ ਇੱਕ ਫੇਰ ਨਵੇਂ ਲੈਕਚਰ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅੱਜ ਵਾਲਾ ਲੈਕਚਰ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਵਾਲੀ ਟਾਕ ਆ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਮਹੱਤਵਪੂਰਨ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਤੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੀ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਕੋਲ ਇੰਨੀ ਸਮਰੱਥਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੀ ਜੜ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਜਾ ਸਕਣ। ਪਿੱਛੇ ਜੇ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਕਰਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਹਾਰਮੋਨੀਅਮ ਫੇਜ਼ ਆਊਟ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹਰਮੰਦਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ। ਉਸ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਹੋਈ ਤੇ ਹਲੇ ਤੱਕ ਉਹ ਲੋਕ ਮਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਲੈਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਤੇ ਇਸੇ ਗੱਲ ਨਾਲ ਸਿੱਝਣ ਲਈ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਗੁਰਮਿੰਦਰ ਕੌਰ ਭੋਗਲ ਜੀ ਨੇ। ਉਹ ਨਾ ਕੇਵਲ ਇਸ ਲੈਕਚਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਾਰਮੋਨੀਅਮ ਦੀ ਯਾਤਰਾ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਸਗੋਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਕਿ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੀਰਤਨੀਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਵਰਤਿਆ ਇਸ ਸਾਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਢਾਲਿਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੀ ਯਾਤਰਾ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਰਹੀ। ਤੇ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਊਗੀ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਸੀ, ਇਸ ਦਾ ਵਡੇਰੇ ਪਰਸਪੈਕਟਿਵ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਔਰਤ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਵਿਮਨ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਔਰਤਾਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹਰਿਮੰਦਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਰਨ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵਕਤ ਕੱਢਿਆ, ਇਸ ਲਈ ਮੈਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਦਿਲੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ ਅਦਾ ਕਰਦਾ। ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਊਜ਼ਿਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਹੀ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਊਜ਼ਿਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰਲੇ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਦੋ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੂਗਾ। ਪਹਿਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੈਲਸਲੇ ਕਾਲਜ ਆ ਬੋਸਟਨ USA ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਉੱਥੇ ਕੈਥਰੀਨ ਮਿਲਸ ਡੇਵਿਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਆਫ ਮਿਊਜ਼ਿਕ ਨੇ। ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਸੀ ਉਹ 2013 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਛਪ ਕੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਈ ਸੀ ਆਕਸਫੋਰਡ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਤੋਂ, ਤੇ ਉਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦਾ ਸਿਰਲੇਖ ਸੀ ਡਿਟੇਲਸ ਆਫ ਕਨਸੀਕੁਐਂਸ ornament music and art in Paris। ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਦੂਸਰੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਆਕਸਫੋਰਡ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਛਾਪੀ ਗਈ 2018 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਤੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਸਿਰਲੇਖ ਹੈ ਕਲੌਦ ਡਿਬੋਸਿਸ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਦੀ ਲਿਊਨ। ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੱਕ ਤੀਸਰੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲਗਭਗ ਛਪ ਕੇ ਆਉਣ ਲਈ ਤਿਆਰ ਆ, ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਆ, ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੀ ਉਡੀਕ ਆ। ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਬਾਹਰ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਗੁਰਮਿੰਦਰ ਕੌਰ ਭੋਗਲ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਗੁਜ਼ਾਰਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਆਓ ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਐਡੀਟਰ ਵੀ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਮਿਊਜ਼ੀਕੋਲੋਜੀਕਲ ਸੁਸਾਇਟੀ ਆ ਉਹਦੀ ਇੱਕ ਮਿਊਜ਼ਿਕ ਮੋਨੋਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਸੀਰੀਜ਼ ਆ, ਉਹਦੇ ਐਡੀਟਰ ਵੀ ਨੇ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸ਼ਬਦਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦਾ, ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ ਅਦਾ ਕਰਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਫਾਰ ਡਾਇਸਪੋਰਾ ਸਟੱਡੀਜ਼ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਪਟਿਆਲਾ ਲਈ ਵਕਤ ਕੱਢਿਆ। ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ।
Thank you so much, Professor Gurmukh Singh, Professor Dharmjit Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gurmukh. Now I would request Professor Bhogal to begin her talk. Professor Bhogal.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you for the invitation. I was so happy to receive it, and I'm really happy to give this talk. My email address is here on this first slide, so please email me if anyone has any questions beyond the talk. This is a picture of a harmonium here. I think you cannot be in Punjab and not have seen a harmonium, but I thought I should put it just in case. It's a very important instrument for us. So my warmest greetings to all of you. Thank you for coming to my talk. The next slide is, this is the article. It was published recently in Yale Journal of Music and Religion. My talk is based on the article. It's updated. And the QR code is there. If you want to scan it on your phone, you can reach it. This is open access. Everybody can access this article. So please you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to begin here. Can you see the complete slide?
Hanji.
Okay. So my initial motivation for the research, I started out wanting to study how the harmonium is used in Sikh Kirtan. I had read many books about Hindustani classical music, and nobody spent much time talking about Punjab. And the emphasis on the harmonium, especially in Sikh Kirtan, was very limited. So that's what I initially set out to do. And especially thinking about how the harmonium is used in Kirtan, in devotional worship, and in pedagogy. And then after I had written a draft of this chapter, Gyani Harpreet Singh made an announcement, a proclamation, which was effectively issuing a ban against the use of the harmonium at Harmandir Sahib or Darbar Sahib. This was in May 2022. So then my focus changed. I was really struck by this ban, and I wanted to understand more the debate. Many people started to debate the ban, the rhetoric of the ban. What was he saying? How was he saying it? And this was all in relation to the history of the harmonium. And then my questions began to change. I wanted to think more about how and when the harmonium entered Darbar Sahib. We had an idea, but I wanted to know exactly how it happened. And I also was thinking again about pedagogy, how the unique way Sikh Ragi play the harmonium, it is very unique in comparison to how other regions of India use the harmonium. Ragi play it in a very distinctive way. And I wanted to think about how it's used to teach Kirtan to children, to adults. And my focus here, as Professor Gurmukh Singh has said, was also on female students. And then my goal became I saw it was very intertwined with the social, cultural, and political history of Punjab, of colonial Punjab and post-colonial Punjab. So I became much more deeply invested in investigating that. And also there was a lot of misinformation about the ban. And I wanted to provide a historical context for understanding the place of the harmonium in Punjab and in Sikh worship. So these are the overall goals. This is the plan for my presentation. There are 5 parts. First, I'm going to discuss the ban. I'm sure many of you will remember it, but for those who are coming to this brand new, I want to tell you what the ban was about. And my methodology, I was looking at print media. I was looking at newspaper articles. I'm not on social media. People were sending me things to read. So whatever I was getting that way via social media. And then the second part is, how did the harmonium reach Punjab? And here, I was using a lot of primary sources to understand this journey. Newspapers, magazines, journals, census reports, gazettes, encyclopedia. And then the question, how did the harmonium get from the Christian missionaries to the local Indian communities? That was another journey that I wanted to track through primary sources. And then there was a link, Mirasi, who were critical to the harmonium reaching the Sikh communities and reaching the place of Sikh worship in Gurdwara. And then finally, in my final section, we listen to a little bit of Sikh Kirtan, different examples, and I will think about the journey in sound recording of the unique way that the harmonium has been played. So this is the 5-part plan. I will begin with part 1, the proclamation from Akal Takht in May 2022. What were Gyani Harpreet Singh's main points? He said that the harmonium is foreign. It's a foreign instrument, and we should return to play traditional tantisas. So these instruments would include, of course, rabab, which everybody knows from Bhai Mardana's rabab, saranda, sarangi, taus, and dilruba. And the second point in much of what he was saying was that the Akal Takht intends to phase out the harmonium over a period of a few years. And many of you will know this is not the first time. There's been other moments that the harmonium has attempted to be banned. The most famous one was 1940 by All India Radio. And they kept that up for a few decades, and then they had to lift that ban in 1971. Now, this is from the perspective of the Akal Takht. What are the arguments against the use of the harmonium? Firstly, they were saying it is not an Indian instrument. It has come to India from principally Western European Christian missionaries. The second point, they said the tantisas are instruments of the Sikh darbar from the 15th to the 18th century, and their use should be revived and prioritized. The argument here also is that tantisas are authentic. These are the authentic instruments, and their alignment with Shabad means that their sound is pure. And there are two ideas here that I unpack a little bit in the article, the notion of sonic authenticity and the notion of sonic purity. So sonic authenticity is when we think about the instruments themselves of the Sikh Darbar as being authentic. Okay, this is a bit of a complicated term, authenticity, and I can come back to it a bit later. The second idea is the notion of sonic purity. So this is when an instrument enters the darbar and it becomes pure, pavitra, because of its alignment with Shabd. So that's the idea of sonic purity. So these are the ideas that were kind of circulating in these arguments. I was thinking, okay, how am I going to organize my ideas? What isn't my conceptual framework? And I came across two really wonderful sets of ideas. One is an article by Felix Stockhammer. He has the notion of entanglement. And so stage one, this is when a new object enters an unfamiliar space or a new community. So relational entanglement is when an object like the harmonium is appropriated and integrated into local practices, systems of meaning and worldview. So you can think about that in terms of how was the harmonium first taken in. The second stage is really interesting for the harmonium. Okay. This is called material entanglement. This signifies the creation of something new that is more than just the sum of its parts and combines the familiar with the previously foreign. This object is more than just a sum of the entities from which it originated and clearly not the result of local continuities. It can be taken as a representative of a new taxonomic entity. So when I was thinking about this, the question that came to me, is the Indian harmonium the same instrument that came to India with the missionaries, or has it evolved to become a new instrument altogether? That is what this the stage two suggested to me as a question. And then I was also intrigued by Anil Kumar Belwadi's concept of mimicry as rivalry. And this was an important point for me because, otherwise one would think that the missionaries brought the harmonium, local people just took it and started to play it like the missionaries were playing it, and this did not happen at all. It's really important to know that the Indians did not simply mimic the posture, playing style, and music of their Christian teachers. They actively reworked how this instrument was used in worship, and they endeavored to make it their own. And that's a very important point that I want to really emphasize here. So this was my conceptual framework. I'm now going to just do a quick kind of survey of the ban, focusing on three viewpoints that were dominant in a lot of the conversation about the ban. The first viewpoint comes from the perspective of Gurmat Sangeet, and the spokespersons here are Balwant Singh Namdhari and Bhai Baldeep Singh. And their perspective, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting anybody, but from what I understand, their perspective was get rid of the harmonium. And I want to also just very briefly define Gurmat Sangeet for those who want a very quick reminder. This is a tradition of Sikh Kirtan that prioritizes singing Shabd in the designated rag of Guru Granth Sahib and in most instances on tanti saz. Okay. And their criticisms, this is Balwant Singh Namtari and Baldeep Singh, their criticism was that the harmonium has a keyboard. Have you seen the white and the black keys? And these pitches are tuned according to the system of Western equal temperament. So going up the keyboard, you have half steps and whole steps. Okay, now this tuning system is not nuanced enough to accommodate the Shruti of Hindustani classical music. There are many more pitches in between those half steps than you can capture on the harmonium. So the second criticism then is that due to constraints of tuning, rag cannot be accurately played on the harmonium. So then the consequences of this is that to compensate for these limitations, Ragi tended to draw on popular tunes or commercial melodies that are easier to adapt to equal temperament. The consequence here is the devastating loss of repertoire, which included Puratan Rit, these orally transmitted melodies, Bandish, that are characterized by distinctive rag, and the way that the rag has to flow through these particular shruti in order to signal its presence. And then, along with the loss of this repertoire and these rag, there was also a decline of Sikh musical instruments, those that were associated with the practice of Kirtan. So this is our perspective 1. Okay, perspective 2. This is from the standpoint of Ragi Jatha. These are mainly trained, mostly male practitioners of Kirtan, and a spokesperson here is Bhai Harjinder Singh Srinagarwale. So his ultimate point was respect tanti sas, but keep the harmonium. And there were a number of anxieties here he was addressing. If the harmonium goes away, how will the majority of Kirtaniya earn their living? Which is a very serious question, a very real question. And then there was another concern, which was voiced by instrument makers, particularly those whose workshops are involved with harmonium repair and manufacturing. They rely on this for their livelihoods as well. So they were also worried that they would lose their businesses. And just a quick comparison of harmonium versus tantizas. The harmonium is relatively inexpensive in comparison to tantizas. It's widely available. It's robust. It doesn't need constant tuning. If you play tantizas, you're constantly tuning. And it can be learned fairly quickly without a teacher or using books or online resources. The student can progress pretty quickly towards performing and teaching Kirtan. And also during Kirtan, during Divan, the harmonium is loud enough to support the Ragi and the Sangat. So it has a good, robust presence in that sense also. In comparison, tantisas are more expensive. They're not as widely available. That is changing. They're tricky to maintain and tune. You constantly have to take care of your instrument. They're weather sensitive. You have to learn with the ustad or a guru. It takes several years. And in comparison to harmonium, tantisas are more quiet. So you have to use some kind of amplification technology, especially when you are using tantisas in Kirtan and you need that support for the Sangat. So these are some of the pros and cons of tantisas. So my third, I want to just quickly summarize his points and then I'll move to the third perspective. Bhai Harjinder Singh, I think, showed quite a balanced viewpoint. He says these are our traditional instruments associated with the Gurus. We should know them. We should respect them. The harmonium has also been a part of the Guru's court since the 19th century. And over time, the impure harmonium, apavitra, has become pure pavitra through its use in Kirtan. And he mentioned, this is like another foreign instrument, the Irani, the Persian rabab. So that is a very interesting part of his argument. And then he makes the other point, which is the choice of instrument is less important than attunement to Shabad, which is foremost. And then he says, use tantisas, use the harmonium, but don't get rid of the harmonium. So this is by Harjinder Singh, Srinagar's points. And then the middle road. Here I refer to my colleague, Harjinder Singh Lali, who is at professor at the University of Warwick. He wrote an article a few years back, The Harmonium in Sikh Music. And he's advocating for a hybrid approach, which is what what we are seeing more and more nowadays. He said the harmonium is now a fully pledged Sikh instrument. It's here to stay. It is a mainstay in the modern Sikh experience. And he says, but at the same time, preference might be given to traditional Indian instruments that provide a richer and more orthodox musical experience, which better captures and presents the emotional sensitivities of the Shabad. So here, this really is the middle road, because he's also saying that, with Gurmat Sangeet, the importance of rag in tying you to the deeper essence of the Shabad can be conveyed much more through tanti, through traditional instruments. Okay, what is the present situation? This is, I typically listen to Asa Kivar in the mornings, and I tune in online on YouTube to Darbar Sahib, and this was Monday. This was Mondays. I just wanted to show you something recent. So you can see 2 harmonium, tabla, and dilruba. And so the SGPC has been saying that it's going to use tanti saz in addition to the harmonium. And, at the moment, I would say at the moment, I'm going to stress that they're saying that, they're not going to displace or replace the harmonium. These instruments will continue to be a part of Kirtan Jatha. And to be honest, this is what I called a hybrid Jatha, hybrid meaning tanti saz plus harmonium. This has been in place for many years now. We've been seeing it. The proclamation may have just suddenly startled us, but this has been happening in front of our eyes. So it really is not a shock to see this. And I think this is going to be going on for some time. But anyway, I wanted to give you a sense of the here and now. This is a really important point that came up in when I was going through the newspapers and trying to understand the debate. One article really struck me by Rohit Patania, and he said, everybody's focusing on the criticism of the harmonium ban, but many people are also commenting on the SGPC's priorities. There is a more important question rather than musical instruments, which is why are women still not permitted to perform Kirtan at Darbar Sahib. So it seems like the ban wasn't just talking about musical instruments, it was talking about, of course, colonization, it was talking about the missionaries and their work, and it was talking about so many other social cultural issues, and the role of women in Kirtan was a really critical issue that was coming up as well. So he calls it the elephant in the room. Why is this not being addressed? And I'm going to now move to the topic of Kirtan pedagogy. It links to the topic of the elephant in the room. Kirtan pedagogy, this is where female Kirtaniya continue to be visible as experts, as teachers, and as students, especially among the Sikh diaspora. So this is of interest to the Center of Diaspora Studies. SGPC is also prioritizing training in Gurmat Sangeet using tanti saz, and in the diaspora, there is a parallel interest to rebuild ties to their historical sacred music heritage. There are many institutions, I can't name them all, across the Sikh diaspora that have been moving in this direction. In the UK, there are several, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, Singapore, a few centers in continental Europe as well. There is a really big passion and deep interest. And again, I really want to emphasize this point to really nurture the female Kirtani who come through and give them equal opportunities to participate in Kirtan, especially at Darbar Sahib. But it is very important that everyone supports this, everyone commits to this, not just women. This is now part 2. Now I'm moving more into the historical part of my talk. And it's called Destination Punjab. How did the harmonium? So I want to trace a little bit of the long history of the harmonium. This is usually not in view when we're talking about the harmonium, but the harmonium is related to the organ. It's a predecessor of the organ. And the pipe organ reached India in the 16th century with the arrival of the Portuguese. The organ was used in Portuguese areas of settlement around Goa and such by the Jesuits for Christian worship. And interestingly, they were also part of cultural diplomacy. These instruments, organs, and other kinds of keyboard instruments were given as gifts, as diplomatic gifts. Also, this was an act that was performed by English and the Dutch when they came. This is generally mentioned in accounts about the Indian harmonium, the evolution of the harmonium from the free reed organ developed by French and German instrument makers. I've also traced the origin of the free reed itself, which is inside the harmonium, to China. Some people will say it originated in India. It may have at the same time, but I'm seeing more an emphasis on China in the historical sources. And then the harmonium that we have today, the earliest versions of that arrived in India with the British and American missionaries. When some of the earliest forms were these upright pedal harmoniums, and then these evolved over time into table and lap harmoniums, and finally into what we have now, the compact box harmonium. This is an important point. So, middle of the 19th century, this is when the Christian Missionary Society was headquartered in Amritsar by 1851. And, they noted, and we all know that the state of the Sikh Empire by the middle of the 19th century was quite vulnerable. And so the missionaries were kind of ready for religious conversion, and especially among the lower social classes across Punjab. And now each of the quotes that you see in red are from my primary sources. So in one review I read from 1866, they said it's just the time to work among the Sikhs because the prestige of their own system is broken and many are disposed to detach themselves from it. So this was the time when, as I said, it was a critical moment for religious conversion. Some of the reasons why Sikhs were targeted as potential converts: their manliness of character, so that they frankly avow their convictions and, if brought under the influence of Christianity, appear well adapted to supply and valuable native agency. And then 1877 in particular, they're talking about Sikhi and why Sikhi has primed the Sikh people to become good Christians. This was a very interesting quote. Sikhi has accustomed men to acknowledge and discuss their religious differences, and where conflict of words as well as of courageous deeds has trained men to independence of thought and action. And now the conversion part, these traits lend themselves well to religious conversion. What missionaries and evangelists, what pioneers, what pastors and bishops too these Sikhs will make once they are converted to Christ. And this remark is from 1877. This I found really very interesting. So this is just kind of giving you a state of the last decades of 19th century around the Darbar Sahib area. So here's a group of missionaries, and they wanted to use a church harmonium to attract devotees who were entering or leaving Darbar Sahib. And they said, we did not possess a portable harmonium. We brought out a church harmonium and took our stand not far from the city gate, through which most of the pilgrims pass on their way to and from the Golden Temple. The music soon attracted large crowds. So this image to my mind is really striking, that there must have been the Kirtan going on in the Darbar Sahib, and then, the hymns going on just not so far at the city gate. So it's quite an interesting image in my mind. So using music and harmonium as a tool for conversion, the missionaries were very clear that music is very powerful. Even before conversion, music does much to prepare the way, for the missionaries to do their work. In all the preliminary evangelistic work in missions, music, singing especially, is of prime importance in finding a way to the heart of heathen, old or young. So that is, these kinds of remarks we see speaking to the power of music in particular. And then it gets a little bit complicated because they realize that Indian people had their own music that they enjoyed listening to. And so there was a little bit of a tension between using Indian music for conversion, or should they teach local communities Western European music? Should they teach them their hymns? This was very interesting to me, this quote. So native Indian Christians hear the indigenous, so the Indian music, day and night, and their minds become accustomed to its peculiar accent, cadence, and rhythm, so that they are unable, for the time being, to displace the beautiful melodic rhythm of their everyday life by foreign rhythm and melody. So this quote was really showing to me that initially that the local Indian communities were not able to connect with Western music, specifically in terms of its rhythm and melody. And then this other thing, other remark, the missionaries realized it takes time. It will take time to convince the Indian communities through the music and through the ideas of Christianity. Gradually, the native Christian community is assimilated to European models and largely loses touch with the best models and methods of its native land. So that's what they're waiting for, is to lose the touch with the native land, and that had faith that it will happen. So now I move to part 3. And again, there is a focus on women here. How did Christian missionaries introduce the harmonium to local Indian communities? So female missionaries used two tools of civilization and modernization: the sewing machine and the harmonium. And I read many sources where in letters and newspaper, in these segments where they were requesting for certain items, they asked for 2 things. They asked for harmonium and they asked for a sewing machine. And here are some quotes for you. So the missionary women, in their spaces where they lived, they would often have a piano, which was a symbol of kind of Victorian idealized femininity. And they also had a parlor harmonium. So they had a piano and a harmonium typically in their homes. And then the missionary women taught the harmonium to children, chiefly girls. And this was within the context of their churches or in schools. And of course, the establishment of the Muktan Harmonium School will give you an idea that these things were established to teach the harmonium and to have a focus on this. And then we have Rosemary Seaton, who's also giving an insight into how the harmonium in particular was used for conversion. Indian women found Western forms exotic or at least novel. Requests to be taught fancy embroidery work, or to play the harmonium were frequently the first indications that a zanana might be open to Christian agency. And then they also realized that if you teach songs that can be sung, or hymns that can be sung while doing work, manual chores, that's also a good way to learn the hymns. And so the girls in the Bareilly orphanage, after the Oriental custom, sit on the floor, grind their grain, and as they turn the mill, they keep time by singing some Christian hymn. So they also realized that the work song was potentially very powerful. I really enjoyed this image, and I wanted to share it with you all. So missionaries of this time were publishing. They had a very powerful publishing network, and I found this in a newspaper. Many of the publications were talking about how the instrument is played, sometimes sitting down, as we've seen, but sometimes standing up, which means that these girls would have been playing something called a table harmonium. And as you can see from this image, table harmonium was sometimes called a lap harmonium. So you could even sit on a chair and prop it up. These were made in the US in the 1830s, and France was also making them. Maurice Casriel was making them in France. And Constant Buisson was also making them. This is an example of Buisson's instrument called the harmony flute. And these instruments are the direct precursor for our harmonium that we have today. So Ashok Ranade talks about the Baithak style, and many people say that Dwarkanath Ghosh is the one who invented it. And I just want to stress that he did not invent it. He, he was creating his own harmonium, but he knew of these other European models, and he was so it took him a little bit of time. He presented his first hand-operated harmonium in 1887. So this is almost 50 years after this instrument that you see here. So just to give you a sense of how the Indian harmonium, how it was coming out of the European instruments that were in India and visible in India at the time. So the Bathak style of playing the harmonium was definitely in place by the end of the 19th century. We have an account from a Christian service in Amritsar. Girls are sitting on the ground in native fashion of the ground playing the harmonium. In Lahore, there is a meeting for Indian men by missionary men. And again, after the native fashion, they all sit cross-legged on a carpet. The exercises consist of a reading, prayer, short address, bhajans, and ghazals. These last are vernacular hymns set to a popular native tune sung to the accompaniment of a flute harmonium, so harmonium, or sitar, and what they say small native drum, kettle drum, which was likely tabla. The point I want to emphasize here is that the harmonium coexisted with the native instrument. It was not that the harmonium showed up and everything else suddenly went away. So the encounter between the local communities and the harmonium was not of docile acceptance. The harmonium was initially forced. The Indian locals forced it to adapt to the soundscape of local instruments. And this is the concept of rivalry that I explore with reference to Balwadi. There's another description that I want to share with you. It was really quite striking. At the morning service, English tunes are sung to Hindustani hymns. But in the afternoon, it is native music and Punjabi bhajans. A bhajan is a cross between a cathedral anthem in its many repetitions and a minstrel ditty in its quaint music. I can see the church now when I close my eyes. In front sit the musicians. The instruments are a sort of mandolin with a very long handle and many pegs. So I wonder if that was like an early sitar. An accordion, which is played this way, it's like a harmonium. It's also wind is generating sound here, and also a pair of drums. So again, that would have been tabla. What would the missionaries have taught? What music would they have taught the Indian locals? So young children would have been taught Christian hymns, British folk songs, marches, British national anthem, and other kinds of patriotic songs. Indian Christians would have translated the hymns into local languages, Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, and they would have sung these either with familiar tunes that they knew already from Indian folk music or devotional song, their own music, or from European tunes that they were learning. This was a very interesting point to me. Some Indian converts said they don't want to use Indian music because they remembered the original words that went with that particular Indian melody. Others felt it's useful to use an Indian melody, and they gradually forgot the Indian words and they adopted the Christian words. So that was interesting. I saw two sides of that argument. And again, I want to show you a little quote of how the harmonium is being used in conversion ceremony. Regarding a new Christian recruited in Patiala, Punjab, we read in 1882 in a woman's magazine how a missionary gave them the unusual treat of hearing the harmonium as they sang together the familiar bhajan, which helped to convert Amba, Jesus Christ has saved my soul. So this is something that they would have known. Again, what was interesting to me as I scanned the sources is that by 1898, right at the end of the 19th century, harmoniums were still not widely observed in Christian worship and in some regions of Punjab. So they're still not a very popular instrument or familiar instrument. So this is, I wanted just to show you a few quotes. What did the missionaries think of Indians, trying to make their first attempts at Christian worship? Through music. Well, when I read this long, as you can see, a few lines of red text, I didn't fully grasp that the writer was saying the music sounded bad. I had to read it a few times. So he's describing the bhajan. Tears, don't ask me to explain how they were played or what was the musical result. Tears rolled down my cheeks at first, and I would gladly have run out into the vestry, but once soon got used to it. I initially thought tears rolling down my cheeks meant this person was very touched and moved, but it meant no, it was terrible. It was a very interesting quote. And then Emma Scott Moore. So this is a well-known book, Hindustani tune book. So she harmonized melodies. These were transcribed Indian melodies, so melodies that she had heard the Indian locals singing, and then she wrote them out into Western notation and gave them harmonies. And she said the bhajan sounded so much smoother when played on an organ or a piano than when sung by native choir to native accompaniment. So also now she's trying to Westernize Indian melodies by giving them harmonies and by putting it on a piano or organ. And here now we see somebody admiring. On the other hand, I wanted to show you both sides. Somebody saying it sounded great, what the local Indians were doing, a transcription of hymns for native instruments by a choir in Ludhiana. The Psalms of David were translated into Indian poetic poems set to Indian tunes. The choir has a tabla. And two tamarines. I think these must have been chane and other kinds of instruments like that. Small string instrument like the violin. I don't know if this was sarangi, something like this. And with this band, there was no need of the staid old Mason and Hamlin organ. So they were not even looking at the organ or using it. They were doing their worship using their own Indian instruments. So now I go to part 4. A missing link in missionary dependence on Mirasi. So within a short space of time, this was a question for me. The harmonium coexisted with and replaced instruments that had been played in India for several generations. How did this happen? Was something that I kept asking myself. How did this happen? The thing that became clear to me as I was working through the missionary sources is that Mirasi, the local hereditary musicians, were really critical mediators. It could not have really happened without the assistance of Mirasi. And I would like to just briefly define Mirasi as differentiated groups of hereditary professional musicians. And they held varying roles as genealogists, musicians, entertainers, markers of life cycle events, births, weddings, mediators of devotional worship. And they performed a variety of music, including folk, popular devotional music, and here the research of Suhail, Yusuf, Gibb, Schreffler, and others is really helpful. The Mirasi community was categorized by the British missionaries as low caste. And so one quote is, "It should be remembered that in India, music belongs to the lowest of the low." And it was sarangi players in particular who were cast in a negative light because they accompanied dancers, and British India looked down upon these accomplished courtesans. And so, it was that categorization really, that negative categorization lingered for a long time. And in comparison, the missionaries said that their own Christian religious music was refining, and it had a Christianizing influence upon rural Indian society. So they elevated their own and really kind of pushed down some of the local traditions that the Mirasi were involved with. This is an important point, that during the 19th century, their perceived low socioeconomic standing and highly valued professional skills meant that the Marathi became helpful to the missionaries in two ways. They were facilitators of a two-way transfer of musical knowledge. So they helped the missionaries, and the missionaries also taught them stuff. So it went both ways, two-way transfer. And the Marathi were also potential converts. And so how did the missionaries interact with Marathi? Well, the sources themselves say that it would have been really difficult for the missionaries to do their work if they did not have the Marathi there to help spread the message of Christianity and prepare the stage for conversion. One worker, Anne Wilson, says that the musicians were our neighbors wherever we went. Every village of Punjab contained some of the Marathi caste to which these men belong. For as we learnt, the people of India are essentially a musical race. Marathis wander about the Punjab like the bards and minstrels of the Middle Ages. An American source from 1890 describes the conversion of a whole family of Marathi. They call it Miasi in this article. The Miasi is a singer by hereditary profession. Among the four of this family is a bright lad of 14 who plays the sarangi or fiddle beautifully. In a few days, he learned to sing and play two of our most popular bhajans. He is of great use to us in our work. So this young boy would have been helping them as they go out into the village. The public bazaar is a really interesting space. So Marathi who were employed to play Sikh Kirtan would also have played other kinds of music, and they also would have, gone outside of sacred spaces, Gurdwara and such, to play these other kinds of music. And the public bazaar was a meeting ground where the missionaries gathered because there were so many people, there's so much activity, and they would give their sermons there. And musicians would also have been present at these bazaars, Marathi, Jogi, and others. And Raj Bahadur Sharma reminds us that these bazaar preachings were a pretty effective way of reaching potential converts. And Marathi introduced Christian music to the local people. They would play Christian music on instruments that they were playing anyway. Sarangi, I've mentioned, chikara, dutara, dholak, and other instruments. So there's a threefold process that I want to underscore for the Marathi. One is that they would have helped the missionaries with their musical endeavors. They themselves, then, this close contact would have given the missionaries a chance to convert the Marathis themselves. And then the Marathis, as new converts, would go out and become musical leaders within the church. So that's the threefold process that I want to underscore there. Okay, this is a bit of a detailed slide. I'm sorry, there's a lot here. So Marathis are using their musical skills. They're composing new music. I want to make sure that they get this credit because they're not often given the credit of being original composers. They were arranging music, and then the missions took the compositions and created these compilations of hymns. And the missionaries also knew that Indians were used to hearing the asthai, antra, kind of refrain verse alternation in bhajan and kirtan. So they tried to keep with that structure in the musical hymns. So it's really interesting that musical hymns also adapted to asthai, antra. And this is a quote that explains how asthai and antra actually work. And they found it confusing. These compositions seem to begin at both ends and leave off in the middle. They were trying to describe it anyway. And then the missionaries are also trying to explain the difference between Christian hymns and bhajans. So bhajans are very long. They're complaining 10 to 15 minutes, but people don't get tired of listening to these bhajans. So they're really relying on them because they're a great help in the service, as the heathen are very fond of hearing them. So adapting the Christian hymn to the format of the bhajan. And then, I begin to see accounts where they're saying that there's a lot of emphasis on hymns just kind of in spaces, in towns, city streets, and village lanes, began reverberating praises to God. Christian and non-Christians were singing the sweet psalms of the Shepherd King. This particular quote by Mary Rachel Martin was interesting. She was clearly working with Amirasi and making her own kind of transcriptions. An elderly Punjabi musician, and hour after hour for months she listened while he played on his sitar, 7-stringed instrument. She picked out the notes and put them in place so they could be sung by the Westerners. The Indians knew the tunes, so she's using the Indian music and now taking it back into the church. Soon the psalms were taking their place and calling on all peoples to praise God. So this gives you a sense of some of the coverage in Missionary. This was the most interesting and really surprising source that I found in the Missionary primary literature. This was a letter by Reverend Worthington Jukes from 1890, and he talks about a musician, Ashik Allah, who he describes as a Mohammedan minstrel. Ashik Allah is sitting in the middle. He's playing the Dilruba, and his brother Aladia is playing the sitar. And he gives me a clue, he gives us a clue of a Mirasi family who were employed by the Sikhs, who were working with the Sikhs, and then gradually moved away, became much more involved with the missionary. And this quote was amazing, really striking. Sikhs who are fond of music always have some music at their devotional services every morning, if they can secure the services of a capable man. Ashikala with his nephew, sorry, I said brother, I meant nephew, Aladia, were accordingly invited to help the Sikhs at their matitudinal devotions. The former with his stringed instrument called Dilruba. It's not a kind of guitar. He describes it as a kind of guitar. And the latter with the sitar, played with a plectrum. Ashikala certainly has the knack of captivating his audience. I've never heard any native play and sing with so much enthusiasm and clear articulation, with so much soul thrown into his spiritual songs, chiefly of his own composition in praise of God and condemnatory of religious hypocrisy and of the pleasure of the world. I mean, for me, this description of the way that Ashikala is singing also gives me just a sense of, when we read about the Rubabi and the Kirtan and the kind of the passion and the strength of that, I can sense that in this particular description as well. So this was interesting. I want to just dwell a little bit on Ashikala and his family, because I think they give us a couple of clues. So they all converted to Christianity, and then the mission took them out with them to wherever they were going to convert more. Ashikala, as soon as he began to play a few chords and sing heart-stirring strains, everyone used to sit quietly and listen. He begged them to give their hearts to Christ in more than one place. The people were so impressed that tears came into many eyes. And since then, a work of grace has gone on. So clearly he was a really very powerful musician with a real capacity to reach others through his music. Here, this is another thing about Ashikala's skills and how they're used for evangelizing. There is a harmonium, which my wife sometimes plays, and we have well-known hymns. Then we have Ashikala, musical evangelist, who plays the sitar and sings gospel bhajans. And again, this was an interesting one. This speaks to the use of a taus. So again, I think this Mirasi, because the taus is so tied to the darbar, Sikh darbar, so this musician may also have been somebody, a Rubabi, who was also singing Sikh worship. But the coexistence of the harmonium, concertina, taus, the voice of the dear old Indian preacher minstrel who has just sung for us on his long Indian guitar decked with peacock feathers. That is the taus of the Savior, whose salvation is free. So these remarks were just really amazing for me. So here I get really into the depth of the project. Mirasi now, as possible carriers of the harmonium into Sikh sacred spaces. And now here's a bit of a timeline for all of you. 1870s, 1890s. Some parts of Punjab saw that the harmonium was being used with local instruments, but Kirtan at Darbar Sahib was still performed on tanti saz. So 1870s, we have one visitor, Dilka, who is talking about Darbar Sahib, tanti saz being played at Darbar Sahib. You are met, this is a very negative account, you are met by a bewildering din. This noise, for under the inner dome sit worshippers by the score, singing with vigor the grandest of barbaric airs to the accompaniment of lyre, harp, and tom-tom. So I don't know what lyre and harp would have been. Tom-tom is tabla, but it's clearly tanti saz. There's no mention of harmonium. 1880, tanti saz is still being used at Darbar Sahib. Sheil is saying, and Akali sang and strummed upon a banjo, probably rhubarb, in all but melody like a Christy minstrel. 1882, we still have tanti saz here. 1891, another kind of negative account of the kind of music. We hear a strange humdrum kind of music from orchestras of stringed instruments. Shrill music made by a group of musicians squatting upon the floor who accompanied their atrocious vocal discords with the confusion of inharmonious stringed instruments. So 1891, still tanti saz. Turning point then comes right at the start of the early 20th century. 1901, Irene Petrie is still hearing quaint-looking drums and fiddles, but just a few years later, this is 1903, Sardar Sundar Singh Ramgarhia is actually talking about the use now of a diminutive harmonium, so a small harmonium. And he says in this account that this is the only wind instrument employed at Harmandir Sahib. That is this is the turning point. I also want to show you another side, which is that missionary literature shows that the harmonium was being taken up by Sikh Ragi by 1905. So the Sodhis of Anandpur styles themselves princes, the descendants of Gobind Singh. Basant Singh, a man prominent among them, never loses an opportunity to help the writer in preaching. Whenever he visits Anandpur with his band of workers, he takes his harmonium and other musical instruments to the most conspicuous place in the city. He then plays the harmonium and asks his companions to help him with their instruments. Our blind musician and singer Narayan Singh and his other workers join them. So, I'm inferring that Sikh musicians, like Muslim musicians, were in contact with missionaries at Anandpur. And it's possible that they were also helping missionaries at other centers like Amritsar, Tarantaran, Ludhiana, Jalandhar, and the other missionary outposts. So these kinds of interactions may have facilitated religious conversion in some instances, but they also provided Ragi with an opportunity to play the harmonium and exercise their skills in transcription, arrangement, composition, the kind of thing that Ashik Allah was doing. And then the scholarship of Ajit Singh Panthal, and we know this from Sikh oral history, Rubabi Pai Wadawa, who also accompanied Pai Atrat at Darbar Sahib during the late 19th, early 20th century. And he's often described as being the first to use the harmonium in Sikh Kirtan. So we also have a sense of who may have been the first person to actually do this at Darbar Sahib. There was resistance to the harmonium and its use in Sikh Kirtan. I think we forget this initially. So this is the Spokesman's Weekly, a newspaper that was operating in New Delhi and Jalandhar. This is an article from 1920 I found. Somebody was saying that Kirtan, this is at that time, Kirtan in Sikh Gurudwaras must be vitalized by Sahib Randir Singh's Jathas, should serve as an example. Professional Ragis cannot give us much inspiring performances. The Sangat must take up this sacred work, and the rhubarb and sitar must replace the harmonium. So over 100 years ago, somebody is saying this. And, as I say, the harmonium, and people were still learning how to play this instrument. It was already posing a threat to tanti saz. And, amplifying technology, people were not enjoying the air-splitting blare of loudspeakers. As the same writer says in 1920, he says, Gurbani must be clear, and the accompanying music must be sweet and soothing. So this was a very interesting article that I found. And then more resistance actually came from outside the Sikh community. And this was, my understanding, is reasons to do with political strategy. A missionary account from 1921 suggested that, the Indian musicians should be encouraged to use their local instruments. And there were many waves of rising nationalism in the wake of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And so they wanted to somehow manage that at this time, but it was already too late, because American missionaries by 1922 were saying that the harmonium is an Indian instrument along with the sitar. So about 100 years from today, it was already stamped as an Indian instrument. And then just a few reflections. The missionary sources, they provide a very valuable historical context for understanding how the harmonium entered the domain of Sikh Kirtan. This has been missing in the scholarship, in literature, in discussions, in public fora. Really a deep dive into the missionary sources. I think this article is one of the first places to provide that deep assessment. The harmonium's impact on the decline of Sikh instruments did not lead to their extinction. In our minds, I think we think the harmonium showed up one day and everything else just disappeared. It didn't happen like that. There were people who didn't play the harmonium in Sikh oral history, by Makhan Singh, by Sham Singh, by Sundar Singh Attamandi, and many more ragi. I say they kept the fire burning so that the resurgence of tantisas now by young Kirtaniya can happen. There were people who didn't want to play the harmonium at all. And then I asked this, it led to a decline in the use of string instruments, but the harmonium also entered India's orchestra, and it was transformed into something of a new instrument. Now I'm kind of turning in another direction towards the final part of my paper. Did the harmonium displace tantisas in early recordings? So I've listened to some of the earliest Sikh recordings that were made by the Gramophone Company. I don't have time to go into it here. So these were made 1903, around that time. And Michael Kinnear is the scholar who's done the work on this. So I refer you to his work, by Mehru, by Uttam Singh Hakim. There are some recordings by Saint Ditta, and we have their recordings. They're recorded in a variety of rag, even rag that are not included in Guru Granth Sahib. And you can listen to some of these. Some are available online. And what I heard is that the harmonium is being used, but the sarangi and dilruba, other instruments, are also being included. So the question I had is this a tiered organization where the tantisas are becoming subservient to the harmonium? They're not disappearing, they're still there, they're still present. So something to think about. This is the final section now of my talk. And I have now, what I'm going to do is give you many of you will be familiar. This is really for those who are not familiar about how the Kirtan is used in Sikh Kirtan, how the harmonium is used in Sikh Kirtan, but I want to show you specifically a sense of how Kirtaniya are trained to play the harmonium. I'm focusing on a few techniques: fingering, so how to use the hand on the harmonium, creating a tanpura, drone effect, playing chords and triads, and alankar. So my first example is Bibi Ashuprit Kaur. And this Shabad gives you an example of fluid fingering of the harmonium, how the harmonium matches the movements of the voice very closely. And there's a lot of swift movement between the pitches. the harmonium is matching every note and providing this support in terms of pitch and volume. You'll hear about a minute into the recording. I'm going to play you just a small segment of each shabad, that there's an octave coupler. So this means that there's a knob that's pulled out at the front of the harmonium, and you will hear that there's a lower register that's also being used. So let me play a little bit of this shabad, Bibi Ashuprit Kaur. Mera Ved Guru Govinda, Mera Ved Guru Govinda, Mera Ved Guru Govinda, Har Har Naam Okhad Mukh De, Har Har Naam Okhad Mukh De, Kaate Chamki Bhanda, Kaate Chamki Bhanda, Mera Ved Guru Govinda, Mera Ved Guru Govinda. Now you can hear the octave coupler. Janam janam ke dukh nivara, janam janam ke dukh nivare, sukar samare, sukar sadha. So that's just one example. The next example, I want to show you the technique, specific technique of playing against a drone or tanpura type effect. Again, there's a knobs that are pulled out towards the front, or you can hold these other pitches with your fingers. Typically, the pitches ma pani are the ones that are held down depending on the rag. This is by Shamsher Singh Zakhmi, his Mangla Charan Dandot, and you'll hear that there are these notes that are held at the bottom as a drone while he's singing the Dandot. So this is also another technique. The next technique is using chords to create harmony. So this is when you play multiple pitches at the same time. There are two examples. There are two different ways to do it. So by Nirmal Singh Khalsa, he creates what I call these chord clusters. This is when you actually, we just heard by Zakmi also do this, when you are holding down few notes at the same time. Again, you're approximating the sound of a tanpura or swarmandal, and these are again typically used in the Mangla Charan, in the Dandot. So we'll hear that with Pai Nirmal Singh. And then with Pai Gagandeep Singh, he is specifically using chords much, I think, similarly to how the missionaries would have maybe played little harmonies in the hymns. I think there's a similarity, but you can also compare how he's using these chords, these triads in Har Kirtan Sune, Har Kirtan Gawe. So let me begin first with Pai Nirmal Singh Khalsa. By Gagandeep Singh, this is very different, very contrasting use of triads and chords here.
Har Kirtan sune, Har Kirtan gawe, tis jan dukh nikat nahi aave, tis jan dukh nikat nahi aave. Har Kirtan sune, Har Kirtan gawe, tis jan dukh nikat nahi aave, tis jan dukh nikat nahi aave.
It's very difficult for me to cut each of these shabads off just after a few seconds. I hope you will forgive me. This is very interesting. So I did a scan of hundreds of different shabad. This was a very enjoyable part of my research. I got to listen to many different ragi, which I do anyway. But this time I was noticing what are the differences between ragi of previous generations and now. And now I noticed that currently there seems to be more interest on incorporating these chords, triads, longer musical interludes between the Asthai and Antra, Rahalpada, more vocal on harmonization. But ragi of previous generations tended to use the harmonium as this tanpura kind of drone effect and to match the melody, to double the melody. There was not as much emphasis on these other kinds of interludes or, vocal harmonization and such. So I want to play you some of these other examples of our previous generations, these wonderful ragi who are part of the sacred Sikh heritage, Pai Gurcharan Singh and Pai Avtar Singh. And then I will go to Harjinder Singh Srinagarwale, who I've spoken about, Pai Harjinder Singh, and then Bibi Jaswant Kaur, who you will all know also. So I will start with if just a minute or so of each.
अपने ही सुख सो सब
सब लागे क्या नारा क्या मीत झूठी देखी
And
प्रभ डोरी हाथ तुम्हारे प्रभ डोरी हाथ तुम्हारे प्रभ डोरी हाथ तुम्हारे प्रभ डोरी हाथ तुम्हारे जी जंत तेरे तारे जी जंत तेरे तारे प्रभ डोरी हाथ तुम्हारे
and Bibi Jaswant Kaur.
तन तन ओ राम बिन बाजे तन तन ओ राम बिन बाजे तन तन ओ राम बिन बाजे तन तन ओ राम बिन मधुर मधुर धुनयन हद गाजे तन तन ओ राम बिन बाजे
And then this technique is using triads to create a very rich sound, but also to provide a metric emphasis along with tabla and chane. And we see this in the Akhand Kirtani Jatha style. And of course, the most famous practitioner AKJ style is by Anandveer Singh, and Madhu is a very well-known Shabad. So I'll give you a little bit of this so that you can see how the chords are also used, to create that sonority and also to create that sense of rhythm.
हम पापी तुम पाप खंड हम पापी तुम पाप खंड निको ठाकुर देशा माधो
Okay. And my final example is an example of how Ragi will use Alankar. And this is a really interesting technique. This is I feel, it masks the deficiencies of the harmonium, because you cannot produce mean, you cannot produce andolan, but you can make these little kind of khatka murki type things at the harmonium. And so I want to show you how somebody who's really vocally very, very strong and very subtle with the use of ornamentation by Bayan Singh Bijli and Ajit Singh Mutlashi. This is my final example.
Guru
So I just want to now kind of wrap up, but the summary of these particular audio examples was to illustrate the range of innovations developed by Sikh musicians over the last century or so. What are the things that we observed? Well, first, it's not easy to play the harmonium well. We just heard that actually by Byan Singh Bijli, who's a wonderful harmonium player. And then learning how to master the effect of a tanpura through these cluster chords, and you have to play exactly in time with the voice. You have to play in a sustained manner, incorporating triads or tan, murki, and the ideal is that for the kirtaniya to offer their devotion on the harmonium in a manner that does not invoke admiration, but which directs contemplation of the Shabad. That is the most important goal here. Again, to circle back to the ban and to wrap up, what are the closing thoughts, challenges, and hopes? Well, the current obstacles concern manufacturing of tantisas. So the rise of harmonium manufacturing since the second decade. So it's really hard now to find historically informed, well-made instruments. And people like Bible Deep Singh make their own, and I think we'll get better at it, but it's going to take a bit of time for other people to understand our past instruments. Challenge finding teachers who are conversant with tantisas. And then what is the future of the band itself? The SGPC keeps kind of changing its position. Sometimes it seems very committed, sometimes less concerned. I think the hybrid model is probably going to be in place a long term. And then we also have to keep in mind the impact of pedagogy. Many young kirtaniya are involved in learning Gurmat Sangeet on tantisas. So, and this is not just in Punjab, not just in India, but this is an important part of creating this global Sikh consciousness around issues of heritage and historical continuity. And again, to circle back to an important point, many of these students and teachers are girls and women. The community needs to support female kirtaniya, especially those who seek to offer kirtan at Harmandir Sahib. I want to end with this wonderful quote by Madan Gopal, which I found about the harmonium. It really was very striking to me. The harmonium is a bit like a shadow without the body. It is a cultural remnant of an unfinished colony where the original home is lost and disowned in history by both the colonizer and colonized. It cannot go back to Europe. It has learned to live with its own relative non-presence, its homelessness, and its unending anonymity. So before we throw the harmonium out, if that's going to happen, I don't think it's going to happen. My sense is that it's going to stay a first instrument for children who are learning kirtan and who don't have access to small-sized tantisas. It's also, harmonium is interesting for, helpful for adults who want to learn kirtan later in life, those who have an injury and cannot play tantisas. But whatever we do with the harmonium, I think we should at least remember the journeys of this instrument in Punjab, how it came, and how we altered it. We didn't just accept it as an instrument. We tackled with it, we engaged with it, we interrogated it, we transformed it. And we should remember the many hands that this instrument passed through as it was repurposed to fit the devotional soundscapes of Punjab. So thank you so much for listening. I know I took a lot of time, but I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Professor Bhogal, for such a meticulous and comprehensive take on the cultural and historical journey of the harmonium as an instrument and the manner in which it was appropriated by the indigenous musical traditions as per the needs of the rhythm and melody, and how complex and entangled this journey has been. Thanks a lot. And I would now like to welcome Professor Arvind, Vice Chancellor, Punjab University. And I would now request Professor Arvind to share a few words with us. Professor Arvind.
So, well, I think first of all, I congratulate you in organizing this session and this talk. Uh, the talk, as it unfolded, showed how keen Gurminder Bhogal is as a researcher to research into musical traditions related to Kirtan, related to Christian missionaries, and the journey of Harmonium. Uh, well, I mean, many things can be said, but maybe that will require other occasion where I want to say what is on my mind. But I first of all want to make my first point is that we need this kind of research. The kind of research Gurminder Bhogal is doing is extremely relevant in today's context, and I think such research should be kind of nurtured in the universities in Punjab, and it will be nice if we could have a collaboration where she comes over or our music department and history department collaborates with her and so on, because it's extremely important to contextualize traditions and history and so on and so forth. That's the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make was that I could see that along with the harmonium, she was also talking about the women kirtaniyas and the feminist perspective. And also in the end, she brought out the SGPC and things like that. So what I would say is that I think the Kirtan traditions were very different earlier, before say 19th century. In 19th century, with the coming of missionaries and Christianity, which is a much more rigid, formal way of looking at religion, Sikh religion also tried crystallized itself into certain things, and that led to many things. I mean, if you look at today how we do ardas and how we conduct the Bhog ceremonies, it is very much like the Christian church traditions. We may not agree with that, but there were no such ceremonies in 18th century, for example. So it's a 19th century phenomena, 20th century phenomena, and it is kind of imbibed from the Christian traditions. Anyway, but leaving that aside, to me, equally important thing is that to be able to do kirtan in the proper Sikh tradition, do you have to be an Amardhari? Do you have to be even a Sikh? I mean, the Pai Mardana's disciple, the descendants, were able to sit inside the Golden Temple and do kirtan till 1947. What happened in 1947? That now we say that you have to be an Amritari to be sit on tabia and do kirtan. So I think we are becoming more rigid compared to the earlier Sikh traditions, which were much more inclusive. I mean, the religion was not even so important if you are connecting with the traditions of the Sikh Kirtan and so on. So I think it goes beyond just gender. It has to be expanded into religions. I mean, I was very happy that Mirasi traditions were being talked about by Gurminder Bhogal, because Mirasis are all Muslim, and a lot of them were singing Kirtan and all that and so on traditionally, and there was no problem. But now we seem to have a problem that you need to be baptized. Even when you say baptized Sikh, it is actually the Christian idiom that you're using for defining who the Sikh. So those are very interesting threads that she uh, talked about. The final point I want to make is that see, religion many times is about putting people together, collecting them, and convincing them into doing something. And missionary traditions do it very explicitly. You know, they're very clear. They're using music, they're using everything at their disposal to make people adopt Christianity and expand their breed, as they call it. So, in some sense, if you look at this aspect of missionary zeal, it captures what religion is about. However, spirituality is about something quite different. So, religion and spirituality are very different entities, and music is a third entity which is goes even deeper, because music is a language which came to humans even before the other languages came. So it's a universal language which all humans are able to understand. So music many times becomes the victim of religious traditions, whereas I think one should look at the musical traditions in their own right, and they connect much more with spirituality than they connect with the religion. So I'm saying this actually for Gurminder Bhogal because she has looked at it things at some way, not so much for the audience. So it'll be nice that if that next layer of research where one explores deeper issues of civilization, spirituality, music, and religion, and then reorganize one's thoughts around this. Anyway, so it was a very interesting talk, and I really congratulate Dr. Bhogal for having conducted this kind of research. And I think one of these days or one of these months, she will visit Punjabi University and we'll have an open session. And I think these kind of reflections on traditions is what we should be doing in 21st century. So Diaspora Center has been organizing these lectures, and the series that they are looking at and the kind of diverse topics they have explored through these lectures, it really is really incredible. So as I have been telling Professor Gurmukh Singh and the coordinator that we should kind of, in one session, bring together all the speakers of the past 2 years and have a kind of a conclave where we talk about partition memories and we talk about musical traditions and history and literature and culture in one platform. So maybe we should kind of have a grand finale where we kind of bring all the speakers of the past 2 years together. So with these words, this is where I would say that let's move on with the discussion as the organizers want.
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful to hear your thoughts. I'm very grateful for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Arvind. So I think now we have come towards the end of this engaging session. Professor Bhogal's lecture has been lucid, rich, and complex, and I think we all need time to really imbibe what has been said. So I think there should be no discussion on this. So I'll present the formal vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Gurminder Kaur Bhogalji for taking time out and to be with us and sharing her research with us. And then I would like to thank Professor Arvind, the Vice Chancellor, Punjab University, Patiala, who has been a source of inspiration for us at the Diaspora Center. And finally, I would like to thank Professor Gurmukh Singh, Director, Center for Diaspora Studies, Punjab University, who has been a constant support for me and for all of us for the last 2 years. Thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot.